What's up, everybody? It's your boy. I just bought this book at a thrift store, and it is called United States Stamp Catalog. It is from 1936, and I do not care at all about stamps or collecting stamps. Hell, I don't even like going near the post office, but this book is so cool to me. There's like red little crayon marks almost where it's obvious some old guy, I'm imagining it's an old guy, I can't imagine it's like a cool happening chick collecting stamps in the 1930s, is like marking off the stamps that he's gotten and collected. And I just think it's really cool to have like an old book, and I love old books, but then to have an old book that has like real physical tangible elements of having been read and interacted with almost 100 years ago now is just really cool. And I don't know, show and tell, I guess, aka Reed from Shameless Nerd. Today's video is about a very famous quote. If you end up liking this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps support me doing what I love and convincing my girlfriend to continue letting me type away for hours on my computer writing these scripts while she tries to sleep. You can even become a member and support the channel directly, joining these beautiful people on the screen right here and getting early access to every video I post, as well as some cool exclusive stuff. You can also join the growing Shameless Nerd Discord community and help us take over the world. Also, you can email me at readfromshamelessnerd@gmail.com with any questions, concerns, comments, or sacrificial offerings. All right, let's get into it. Philosophy is annoying. I have a degree in philosophy and religion. I love philosophy. I like read books and stuff. And even to me, philosophy is annoying. I get it. I do. It's just old guys with beards thinking about thinking. And while that gets me excited for some inexplicable reason, I get why it wouldn't for a lot of people. A lot of philosophy doesn't even sound smart. Some of it sounds really dumb, actually. In fact, I think to most people, the single most famous philosophical quote, or whatever you want to call it, of all time sounds really dumb. That quote, of course, is, "I think, therefore I am." And I think to most people who haven't studied philosophy or who don't really tend to care about this stuff very much, you can read that and kind of go, yeah, no shit, I think, therefore I am. And you'd be right. Thanks for watching. See y'all next time. No, I'm kidding. The purpose of this video is twofold. One, to prove that philosophy is actually really cool and interesting, and two, to explain that famous quote and why it was so massively important and world-changing. So let's do a little history lesson for context. As a brief disclaimer, this is all going to be a massive oversimplification. Philosophy YouTube is big and sprawling and scary, and philosophy people, I am one of you. I am doing this for the layman. Please give me the benefit of the doubt here and forgive some of my skipping around and simplification here, because like I said, the point of this is essentially like a marketing tactic for the field that we love, okay? Not a deep dive. All right. So, Jesus invented philosophy in 15 AD. No, I'm just kidding. Philosophy as a field of thought has existed since at least the 6th century BCE. For most of the early years of philosophy, dirty homeless guys in tattered robes tried to figure out what the hell was going on with the world. Ancient philosophy was mostly concerned with what is called metaphysics, and this is like basically trying to prove essential scientific stuff, and this went on for centuries. The early philosophers were doing like pre-science science, trying to discover what shit was made out of mostly. Democritus believed, for example, in the existence of an atom and wrote about it as early as 400 BC, and philosophy largely addressed questions like this for hundreds of years. That's why we have the Socratic method and Archimedes doing triangle shit and the Pythagorean theorem. These were called the pre-Socratics because after Socrates, there was then the classic period of philosophy, because Socrates basically invented modern philosophy, and this was largely through a lens of morality and questioning things and virtue and things like that. This is what most people think of when they think of philosophy. That's Socrates. And then about 200 years after Socrates, you have Plotinus, who is probably the most underrated single philosopher in all of classical philosophy, and he started a shift from what things were to why things were. Started to move from what everything is in a literal sense to what we are in a metaphorical sense. He approached ideas like explaining what we humans are by connecting us to a concept he calls the one, which would be beyond impossible to explain in the 30 seconds I'm willing to devote to Plotinus in this video on my way to discussing the main topic. But Plotinus's philosophy is, to again massively oversimplify, a really interesting gray area between religion and secularism, a collective consciousness adjacent kind of theory about, from International Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the primacy of contemplation over against any traditional theories of physically causal beings. In other words, his entire philosophy is effectively a rebuttal to the metaphysical philosophy altogether, that we are whatever we are and that is enough, and basically there's like other shit to worry about. Jacques Derrida, for example, has remarked that the system of Plotinus represents the quote closure of metaphysics as well as the quote transgression of metaphysical thought itself. Plotinus also has really interesting ideas about perception and the human senses, which gets us back on track toward "I think, therefore I am." To Plotinus, the human soul is a purely intellectual being, whatever it is, and it cannot directly interface with the realities of the world. So human perception and sensation, sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch, pain, love, sadness, hunger, etc., is a vehicle of sorts through which the human soul can make intelligible a human existence. Really, really weird stuff, right? But this value placed on the idea of perception and experience was revolutionary philosophically. And it, among other things, just another disclaimer that I'm massively simplifying all this stuff in the timelines and all that, but it ushered in an era that would stretch for literally 1400 years. This is the area of philosophy that gets much less press. You have the pre-Socratics mentioned, you have obviously Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and then you have like a little Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s, some Machiavelli maybe through a philosophical lens, and then pretty much René Descartes in the 1600s. There is, of course, a myriad of philosophical thought and development taking place in these hundreds of years between Plotinus and Descartes, but if you take an entry-level philosophy class in college, that's kind of what sticks out. And the reason, among, again, other things, but largely, the reason is because that entire time was ruled by a single problem, and that problem is doubt. You see, Plotinus's idea of perception being so important in discerning what life is, and then what life is being so foundational to approaching what to do with one's life, created a chain reaction of philosophical argument that spanned pretty much that entire 1200 or so years. It's hard to trace exactly when it began, but the idea of philosophical skepticism dominated the field of philosophy for over 1,000 years, because to put simply, and I could do a whole video series, I could devote my whole channel to just this idea, but to put simply, the problem is that if you want to, you can be skeptical, philosophically speaking, about just about anything. And this is what happened in the field for this time. One philosopher would ask, well, how do we know that that tree exists? And another would answer, well, because you can see it and you know it's a tree. This is realist philosophy, put as simply as possible. And then another would say, well, if you think you see a tree, but it's really Shaquille O'Neal with his arms outspread, then is that really a tree? And then you're kind of forced to be like, well, yeah, I guess seeing a tree isn't enough to say that that's how I know it's a tree. And then another philosopher would propose, well, we know a tree exists because you're perceiving it, as in seeing something is a very phenomenon or mechanism that makes it exist. This is idealism, formalized and popularized much later by mostly like George Berkeley, but prominent in less specific terms all throughout this period. But if something only exists because I perceive it, why can the guy sitting next to me see the same tree? And then in rebuttal to that, how do I know that we're seeing the same tree at all? Well, because he's describing it in the same way that I am. Well, then is it really about me perceiving something, or is there some unalienable tree out there for me to perceive after all? Another philosopher would then say, well, yes, actually, the tree doesn't exist. This is the answer. And instead, maybe everything is non-existent and the realm in which we live is strictly spiritual. This is material spiritualism, simply put. But that, I mean, come on, like that's not really answering the question now, is it? How do I know that this tree is real? How can I prove it? Well, I can touch it, I can see it, I can smell it, I could taste it, I could try to listen to it, I guess. But none of those senses deserves to be trusted. You could do hallucinogenic drugs and see things that 100% do not exist, at least I hope not. I regularly hear sounds, for example, outside my bedroom window, which I am fully convinced are a masked man ready to kill me and steal my GameCube, but over and over again that sound turns out to be the wind. Why does the wind outside my room keep screaming, hey Reed, I'm coming to kill you and steal your stuff? I don't know. You can ask my best friend Collier about this. One time when I was 14 years old, I farted and it smelled good. He smelled it too. He says to this day it's the worst thing that's ever happened to him. We can't trust our senses, but without them, we have no way of proving that anything exists. And even worse, without this, we have seemingly no way of proving that we exist. And this was the specific question that plagued philosophy for all of this time. It was impossible for like 1200 years to answer that question without the capacity to doubt the logic. How do I know I exist? Well, because other people have seen me. Does that mean that Ash Ketchum and Pikachu are real then? Because if so, I have some really important shit to do. I know I exist because I'm conscious right now. Well, how many times have you woken up from a dream, or for me, more often a nightmare, and realized that the nightmare you were having, in which you were fully conscious and navigating through a fully real world, was in fact not real? I've had dreams where in my dream, I woke up from sleeping, got out of bed, realized I was actually not awake in the dream, woke up from a dream within that dream, and then was like, damn it, I'm late for work. And then because of that panic, woke up in real life to find out it's 4 o'clock in the morning. I have no idea if I'm conscious right now, to be honest. I kind of think I might not be. I'm talking to myself in a computer. I'm staring at a camera right now. I know I exist because I can reason. I know I exist because I have emotions. I know I exist because I'm doubting whether I exist. All of these ideas and a million others were put forth for over 1,000 years, and every single one of them was shot down ultimately by other people way smarter than you or I. For over 1,000 years, all these nerds were dissatisfied and essentially panicking about, oh shit, I don't actually know I exist. Oh god, oh Socrates or whatever, what do I do? And then René Descartes solved it, canonically drunk one night in his house by himself with 3 words: cogito ergo sum, which is usually, of course, translated to I think, therefore I am, but is probably more accurately translated to something like I am thinking, therefore I exist. And this simple phrase absolutely broke philosophy, and these three words separated philosophy into three eras, ushering in modern philosophy and ending a 1,200-year debate. I am thinking, therefore I exist is irrefutable. It is the only irrefutable evidence to this point possible regarding one's existence. In researching for this video, I looked for a really long time trying to find anything similar or even other answers to the question, how do I know I exist? And everything just points you back to Descartes because it's just like the answer. It is impossible to doubt the existence of your own thoughts because in the act of doubting, you are thinking. You could, theoretically, through meditation and drugs and sheer force of will, convince even yourself that nothing exists, that nothing is real, and yet you would be. Descartes himself put it like this: I have convinced myself that there is absolutely nothing in the world. No sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Does it now follow that I too do not exist? No. If I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. You can ignore that last part. Descartes believed in like a weird, evil god that basically created everything just to mess with everyone. I don't know. I don't know. But just thinking, I think, and therefore I am, is itself evidence of you having existed. Because if you could think it, you existed to think so. And basically, again, massively oversimplifying because this is entry-level stuff and ultimately supposed to be a fun video, Descartes essentially cracking this 1,000-year-old case kind of freed up philosophy to direct its attention toward other shit. Thinkers like David Hume, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche and his great mustache, Immanuel Kant, Ayn Rand, Karl Marx, Martin Heidegger, 2 Chainz, none of these great philosophers would exist without René Descartes, and that can be said without exaggeration. Because not only was Descartes' breakthrough a revelation on its own and a foundational philosophical axiom upon which so much else could be built, but for centuries prior, philosophy was stuck. And all of the great thinkers we all point to when we think of great thinkers built their ideas on the backs of great thinkers who built their ideas on the backs of great thinkers who got to spend their time thinking about other stuff because Descartes finally broke the curse of self-evidence. There are also some really interesting things that can be drawn from I think, therefore I am that I want to talk about before I move on. For one, it is written in a way that only works in the exact way that it is written, specifically in first person present tense. As an English teacher, I love this. If you say, she thinks, therefore she exists, then it doesn't work anymore because cracks form in the same way that they formed in making the axiom important in the first place. I don't know for certain that she is thinking. I only know for certain that I am thinking. And then tense-wise, in the same way that we talked about the fallibility of our senses and memories, if I say, I know I existed last week because I was thinking, those cracks again appear. What if I'm misremembering? What if I actually didn't exist last week, etc.? My favorite little deliberate misinterpretation of this is then to extend it to mean that the only thing that we know exists is the present, and therefore being present in the moment is the most important thing because it's the only thing. This, of course, isn't what Descartes was talking about with this, but I just kind of like it. I can has that just as a treat, okay? Now, on to the next thing. If a tree falls in the forest and there's 4 people attached to a trolley rail, the ship that has all the pieces replaced is put in a box with a cat, and the cat's dead and alive, can Achilles actually ever catch the tortoise? Well, thanks for watching. See y'all next time. In today's post-video video, I want to keep with the theme of philosophy and talk about something that's always bothered me and is so hyper-specific and esoteric and annoying, but I think could also be potentially like valuable or interesting, and that is a problem I have with the question, what is the meaning of life? When people get asked this question, like for example in Very Important People, where my all-time celebrity crush, the great Vic Michaelis, asks their guests this question on every episode, people often answer it with something similar to the following. Well, the meaning of life is to find what you love and to pursue that thing, to like never let anyone tell you you can't do what you want to do, to find love, to be happy, etc. And this is just like super not what that question is asking. What is the meaning of life is supposed to be asking an even harder question. What is the meaning of life? Not what is the purpose of a person's life. As in, like, what the hell are we all here for? Why does shit exist? Like, what is the meaning of life? What does all of this mean? Why are things alive? Why are there trees and fish and elephants and honeybees and Republicans? Like, what does it mean to be alive? What is the purpose? What is the value? Is there a value? Why do we have the drive to continue to survive almost no matter what? Why do we value our own lives? What is the meaning of life? I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just think it's kind of a cop-out when people half-heartedly answer that question with any sort of air of authority about what is the purpose of a human existence. Like, that's so obviously subjective and personal and variable, and the purpose of one's human life could be different for every individual person. It could be to find love, or to be happy, or to convince this girl to go to the junior prom with you even though you never had the stones to tell her you had a crush on her since second grade and continuously tried to like squash rumors that you liked her because you were too embarrassed by the thought that she could never possibly like you because you were a dork and she was so cool. And then because you didn't get the courage to ask her, one of the guys who used to bully you in high school gets her to go with him. And then during one of the slow dances at the actual prom, you hear Strawberry Wine by Deanna Carter playing, and you look over to see this guy dancing with her, but you see that she's like visibly super confused and embarrassed. And then you look down to notice that he has his arms up around her neck and he's placed her hands around his waist, and he doesn't realize that he's done this backwards, and the girl's hands are supposed to be around the neck and the boy's hands are supposed to be around the waist, and it's 2012 and there's nothing more embarrassing or soul crushing than being perceived as feminine in any capacity. And you get to watch this guy's ego shatter into 1,000 pieces as he realizes his mistake, and his football player buddies laugh at him, and then he goes to the bathroom, and then his date is standing there with no one, and you're standing there with no one, and in that infinite moment you become immortal. You take her hands, you place them on your neck because you're not some kind of idiot loser, right? And you have 30 seconds that exist in a timeless, ancient moment where you're self-actualized and you found love in a hopeless place. And then that song by Rihanna comes on, You Found Love in a Hopeless Place or whatever, and the girl starts doing that like high school dance grinding thing on you, and your soul just like leaves your body entirely. You're like, oh my God. That's the meaning of life, if you're asking it that way. If you're asking it the real way, the intended way, like, I have no idea. Love you guys. See you next time.